She only wanted the rent I owed, but somewhere between the late nights, quiet fixes, and shared cups of tea, we both found something we weren't looking for. The hallway was quiet when I came back that evening, the kind of stillness that makes every footstep sound louder than it should. The lights above flickered softly, throwing long shadows against the cream-colored walls. My bag felt heavier than usual, though maybe that was just the weight of the day. I had been pushing hours at the cafe, trying to scrape together what I could, but the truth was simple: the rent was late again. And she knew it. She was there, waiting, leaning lightly against my apartment door, arms folded across her chest. Her posture was confident, almost statuesque, yet there was no malice in her expression. Just patience, and a touch of disappointment that somehow stung more than any angry words could have. Her scarf, the deep wine-red one she often wore when the evenings turned cool, caught the faint draft of the corridor, carrying a whiff of jasmine as I approached. "You're late on rent again," she said, her voice low but firm. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, one that left no room for excuses, though I felt a dozen tumble to the tip of my tongue. I met her eyes, calm, sharp, but not unkind. 40-something, graceful in that unforced way that made her presence fill a space without trying. I exhaled, scratching the back of my neck with a sheepish smile that was part apology, part defense mechanism. "I know," I admitted, shifting the strap of my worn-out bag. "It's been a rough month. How else can I work it off?" The joke slipped out before I could stop it, a thin veil over the genuine worry I carried. For a heartbeat, her brows arched slightly, as if caught off guard by my attempt at humor in a moment so serious. Then, something softened in her expression, the corner of her lips twitched, not quite a smile, but a crack in the mask of formality. "That's not really how this works," she replied, her tone easing a fraction. "But I do wonder if you ever stop running yourself into the ground." The air between us felt charged, not with anger, but with something quieter, something that hummed just beneath the surface. I noticed the fine lines near her eyes, the slight tiredness there, the way her fingers tapped once against her elbow before falling still. She wasn't just a landlord collecting debt, she was a woman who carried her own kind of weariness, one I hadn't cared to see before. I unlocked the door slowly, turning the knob as the wooden frame gave its usual soft creak. "Look," I murmured, glancing back at her. "I'll make it right. Somehow." For a moment she lingered, eyes meeting mine, steady, unreadable. "We'll talk tomorrow," she said finally, her voice gentler now. "After you've had some rest." And with that she turned down the hallway, her heels clicking softly against the old wood, the faint trace of her perfume trailing in the air long after she disappeared around the corner. I closed the door behind me, but the image of her waiting there, composed yet quietly human, stayed with me long into the night. The next afternoon, the air smelled faintly of rain even though the clouds had passed. I knocked on her door just like she had asked, a quiet tap that felt far too loud in the stillness of the hallway. She answered almost immediately, as if she had been expecting me, or perhaps she always listened for footsteps outside her flat. Her apartment was warm, lived in. A soft, golden light spilled from the lamps, and somewhere in the background, a kettle whistled. She motioned for me to come in without the formality of words, only a small tilt of her head and a half-smile that didn't quite hide the seriousness beneath. "Tea?" she asked, already pouring a second cup before I could agree or decline. I nodded, setting my bag by the door. The scent of chamomile drifted up as she slid the mug across the table toward me. Our fingers brushed lightly. Her nails were neatly kept, her skin cool from the porcelain. It wasn't intentional, but it lingered in the back of my mind as I wrapped my hands around the cup. "I've been thinking," she began, resting against the edge of the counter. "Chasing rent every month, it's tiring for both of us. You're working long hours. I can see that." Her eyes, dark and steady, flicked toward me and then back to the floor, as if considering the weight of her next words. "There are things around here I keep putting off: the garden, the storage room, a few repairs. I don't like asking, but maybe this is a way we can both catch a breath." I blinked, the steam from the tea softening my focus. You want me to help out? Around the house? Her lips curved just slightly. Call it an arrangement. A temporary one. Until you're back on your feet. The offer surprised me. I had expected a warning, maybe even a final notice, but not this, not a compromise that carried with it something more personal than transactions and receipts. That's fair, I said after a pause, trying to gauge the tone behind her words. I can fix the cabinet hinges, clear the gutters, whatever you need. She looked at me then, really looked, her gaze steady, weighing not just my words but my intentions. There was no judgment in it, only a quiet calculation. Start with the kitchen shelves, she said finally, her voice softening. And the garden, it's been lonely lately. A small laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Gardens get lonely? Mine does, she replied, and this time, her smile reached her eyes. The moment hung there, simple, unforced, but carrying a shift I couldn't name. The rent problem hadn't vanished, but something else had taken root, a sense that this house, this woman, wasn't as distant as the title of landlady made her seem. As I left her flat that afternoon, the scent of chamomile followed me out into the hallway, mingling with the fading trace of her perfume. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the weight of owing, I felt the beginning of being involved. The rain came in softly that evening, a steady whisper against the windows as I stood in her living room, a screwdriver in hand. The loose cabinet hinge she had mentioned sat half fixed before me, but my attention kept wandering. The room had that sort of warmth you only find in lived-in spaces, books stacked in odd corners, a faint scent of lavender polish clinging to the wood, and a soft hum from an old floor lamp that flickered every few minutes. She was nearby, moving from one side of the room to the other, gathering things from shelves, pausing to wipe a frame or straighten a cushion. It wasn't that she needed to be there while I worked, I suspected she simply wanted to keep me company. Careful with that one, she said, leaning slightly over my shoulder to point at a stubborn screw. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the cabinet, fingers brushing mine for the briefest moment. It wasn't deliberate, at least not in the way that called for acknowledgement, but the touch left a small ripple behind, the kind that lingers longer than it should. Got it, I murmured, tightening the hinge. You've been living here long? She chuckled softly, a sound that felt like warm tea on a cold night. Nearly 15 years. Longer than I planned, really. Life has a way of settling you where you least expect. Her words hung there, half an answer and half a memory. I glanced at her, the way the lamplight drew soft lines along her cheek, the slight crease at the corner of her mouth when she smiled without meaning to. There was a history behind those eyes, one she didn't often share. Does it ever get too quiet? I asked before I could stop myself. She paused, the cloth in her hand stilling mid-swipe. Sometimes, she admitted. The house feels fuller when there's movement. Noise. Someone making a mess of the place. Her lips curved faintly. Like you? I laughed under my breath, unsure whether to feel apologetic or oddly invited. Glad I can contribute. For the next hour, we moved in a quiet rhythm, her tending to the plants by the window, me sorting through tools and loose screws. The rain thickened outside, tapping against the glass in steady percussion. Occasionally, she'd lean close to hand me something, her shoulder brushing mine, her perfume faint but unmistakable, citrus with a trace of something warmer beneath. By the time I finished, it was late. The cabinet door swung back into place with a soft click. She stood beside me, arms folded gently, not in reprimand this time but in thought. Thank you, she said, her voice quieter now. You didn't have to stay this long. I shrugged, wiping my hands on a rag. Didn't feel long. She looked at me then, not as a tenant, not as a debtor, just a young man trying, and perhaps for a moment she allowed herself to see me that way. The night had grown still by the time I wrapped up the day's work. The house had that particular hush it wore after sunset, a mix of cooling wood and faint tea leaves lingering in the kitchen. I was wiping down the tools when I heard her steps, soft and unhurried, moving closer. She stood in the doorway, arms loosely at her sides now, no longer folded in that guarded way I had grown used to. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands falling forward, catching the light of the small lamp on the counter. "You've been doing more than I asked," she said quietly, almost as though speaking too loudly might break the delicate calm around us. "I didn't expect you to stay this late." I glanced at the clock, just past 10. "I don't mind," I replied, keeping my voice just as soft. "It's easier to focus when the world outside finally stops moving." She let out a faint breath, not quite a sigh, more like the sound someone makes when they've been holding something in. "It's been a long while since anyone has stayed," she said, almost to herself. For a moment, the room felt smaller. Not suffocating, just closer, as if the space between us had tightened without either of us moving an inch. I set the last screwdriver back in its place and turned toward her. Our eyes met, hers dark, steady, but carrying something she hadn't shown before. A trace of warmth. A flicker of hesitation. A question she didn't ask out loud. "I should probably head out," I said, though the words felt like they belonged to another version of me, one that didn't notice how her hand brushed the counter absent-mindedly, or how her bare feet shifted slightly closer on the cool tile. "You should," she echoed, but she didn't step aside. We stood there for a breath too long. Long enough for me to notice the faint scent of her perfume, something citrusy, mellowed by the day's end. Long enough for her fingers to rest against the edge of the counter, just a few inches from mine. When she finally reached to take the rag from my hand, her fingers grazed my knuckles. The contact was small, trivial, even, yet it sparked something that neither of us named. My pulse quickened. Hers? I couldn't hear it, but I felt the pause in her breath. "Thank you," she murmured, looking down at the rag, not at me. "For all of this." "It's nothing," I said, but my voice betrayed the weight I felt in that quiet space, the weight of all the things I wanted to say but couldn't. She finally stepped back, breaking the tension with a soft, measured smile. "Tomorrow, then," she said, turning toward the hallway. And just like that, the air returned to normal. But the silence that followed me home that night wasn't empty. It was full, charged, and unbearably alive. The storm outside had settled into a steady drizzle, soft enough to hear each drop tap against the kitchen window. I had stopped by to return a set of tools I had borrowed earlier, but she insisted I stay for tea. It was late, later than I expected to still be here, yet the house didn't feel unwelcoming. If anything, it felt like it had been waiting for someone to fill the silence. She sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a porcelain cup, steam curling between us. For a while neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the fridge and the faint ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. "You work too hard," she said finally, her voice low, as though it were a thought escaping rather than a planned statement. I gave a small laugh. "Says the woman who hasn't sat down once while I've been here these past weeks." That earned me a soft smile, the kind that looked almost out of practice. She set her cup down and leaned back, eyes drifting toward the rain outside. "I suppose I keep myself busy. This house, it's easier to manage when it's full of noise. Empty rooms have a way of making you hear things you'd rather not." Her words lingered. There was no dramatic reveal, no sudden confession, just a quiet truth laid bare on a rainy evening. "Does it ever feel too big?" I asked, keeping my tone careful. She hesitated. "Sometimes. When my daughter moved out, I thought I'd enjoy the space." But space turns to echo before you realize it. I nodded, unsure whether to respond with words or silence. In the end, I chose the latter, letting her continue at her own pace. She brushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear, a small movement that somehow felt intimate in its vulnerability. "I didn't mean to tell you that," she said after a moment. "You're just easy to talk to." Her eyes met mine then, not guarded, not expectant, just honest. And for the first time, I saw her not as the woman who collected the rent, but as someone carrying her own quiet weight. I rested my forearm on the table, fingers just a few inches from hers. "I don't mind listening," I said softly. Her hand moved, almost without thinking, resting lightly on my forearm. It wasn't a grand gesture. Her touch was light, almost cautious, but it carried warmth that reached deeper than the porcelain cup between us ever could. "Thank you," she whispered, and it wasn't about the tools or the garden or the bills. We sat there like that, two people with very different lives, sharing a silence that didn't feel empty anymore. The rain kept tapping against the window, steady and unhurried, like the start of something neither of us dared to name. The night was cool, the kind that carried a crispness hinting at autumn. I had just finished clearing the last of the garden clippings when I stepped back inside to wash my hands. She was waiting by the door, leaning slightly against the frame, her arms wrapped loosely across her chest as though she couldn't quite decide if she was cold or thoughtful. "You've done more than enough for one evening," she said, her voice carrying that measured calm I had grown familiar with. "You should get some rest." I dried my hands, the towel rough but warm from the heater. "It's not a problem," I replied. "It feels good to leave something better than I found it." Her lips curved into a faint smile, not a full one, but close. "You make this house less empty." The words caught me off guard. It wasn't what she said, but how she said it, not as a compliment, but as an admission. Something about the way her eyes held mine made the room seem smaller, softer. I reached for my bag, ready to leave, but paused at the doorway. "Will you be all right tonight?" I asked, unsure why I needed to. She tilted her head, a hint of amusement in her expression. "I've been all right for years. But it's been a while since someone asked." We stood there, either of us moving. The hall clock ticked somewhere behind us, and the faint scent of citrus and tea leaves clung to the air between us. "I should go," I said finally. "You should," she echoed, but didn't open the door right away. Her hand rested on the knob, her fingers pale against the brass, yet she didn't turn it. Instead, she looked at me, really looked, as though memorizing something she hadn't realized mattered until just then. And then, with a small breath, she stepped closer. Just enough for the warmth of her to reach me. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter now, "for being here, even if it started for the wrong reasons." Before I could answer, she moved, a small, hesitant embrace. Her arms slipped gently around my waist, not possessive, not eager, just there. Her cheek brushed my chest for the briefest moment, and I felt her exhale, a soft warmth through the thin fabric of my shirt. I let my hands rest at her back, unsure where they belonged, unsure if this counted as overstepping or simply meeting her where she stood. Neither of us said anything. There was no need. When she stepped back, her eyes didn't linger, and neither did mine, but something had shifted. The door opened, cool air spilling in, and I left with the faint scent of her hair still clinging to me like an afterthought I couldn't shake. Morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, tracing soft, uneven patterns across the kitchen table. The house was quieter than usual, but not in the hollow way it once was. There was a hum to it now, the kind of quiet that feels lived in, rather than endured. I was lacing my boots, ready to leave for work, when she appeared at the doorway. No scarf today, no practiced composure, just her, hair loosely tied, a simple cardigan draped over her shoulders. In her hands, a small paper bag. "You're heading out early," she said, more observation than question. "Trying to," I replied, standing up. "The cafe's been picking up. It helps." She nodded, stepping closer. "I made something for you." The bag crinkled softly as she held it out. The faint smell of toasted bread and something sweet drifted from within, homemade by the look of it. "For the road," she added, her tone light, but her fingers lingered just slightly as they brushed mine. I took the bag, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "Not rent?" I teased gently. Her laugh came quiet but genuine this time. "Not rent. Just thanks." We stood there for a moment, and in that stillness, I realized how far we'd come from that first tense night at my door. The overdue bills, the awkward jokes, the quiet hours spent fixing what was broken, none of it had been the real story. It was this, the way she had let me in, little by little, until the house no longer felt like hers alone, and I no longer felt like just a name on a payment sheet. "I guess I'll still owe you a little work," I said, half turning toward the door. She leaned lightly against the counter, arms crossing loosely. Only if you want to. The shelves survived your repairs, the garden looks like it's breathing again. I think we're even. Even. It was a nice word, but we both knew it didn't quite fit. There was a warmth now, something mutual and unspoken, growing in the quiet spaces between errands and teacups. As I reached for the doorknob, she said my name softly, just that, nothing more. I glanced back. Take care of yourself out there, she said, her voice carrying a softness I hadn't heard before. I nodded. You too. And as I stepped out into the morning, the paper bag warm in my hand, I felt something shift, not a dramatic change, just the steady kind that lingers, waiting for the next moment to build upon it. The rent was paid. The house was mended. But what remained was more valuable than either, a quiet promise, unspoken yet understood, that this connection didn't need a debt to keep it alive.